programming in the History, Social Sciences, Philosophy Department's Sound Collection Lab is made possible in part by funding contributed for the Porter Legacy Initiative.
Good evening. And I want to tell everyone I am totally out of my comfort zone. So what you get will be what you get, because I've not been one to talk about me. I'm always wanting to talk about somebody else. And the other thing is that when I talk about things where maybe I achieved something, that really takes me out of my comfort zone, because I grew up in an era where you didn't brag, and that was considered back in the day, that you didn't say, if you did something really well or something, you let other people talk about it, but you didn't ever say anything to acknowledge it really yourself. So I'm going to do the best I can with kind of giving you a little overview of who I am. And you know, when people are born, when the people die, and the obituary, you see it says born in 19 whatever, or what the date, and a dash, and then the date of passing. Well, I'm going to give you that dash, and I'm still here. But what I want to be sure that you understand, that some of the things and I was born in 1932. So if you little math scholars want to calculate that, you know what it is. At the time, back in I want you to remember that era, that what was going on in our society. Some of it was very unpleasant. So some of the things that I may say may take you out of your comfort zone, but it's truth. And truth never hurt anybody. And so I just want to warn you up front that some of the things I'm going to say, it's just things that happened to me. I'm not talking about what happened to others or whatever, but these are things that I actually experienced. I'm not talking about somebody else's experiences. These are mine and my experiences. And since they asked me to do this, I've been trying and trying to put in some kind of order. So it's not going to come out in any kind of real order from, oh, she was born on this date and the next day she did this and she did that. That's just not the way it works. So I'm going to give it to you as it comes to me, all right? And my name is Dorothy Jean. I was born Sanders. Born and raised in Alma, Arkansas, not too far down the road. My name came from a family friend, and she asked when at my birth time, she asked if she could name me, and what she said, if I have a name I want her to have, and I want to give her a ring that when she gets old enough that she can have. And so I was born and given the name of Dorothy Jean. And the gift of the ring was a cameo ring. I still have the ring. I didn't bring it, but I still have the ring that was given to me for her naming me. To get into who I am the 8th child of 14 children, born to Velma Randall Sanders and Elwayne Sanders, who were born and raised in the Alma area as well. Now, to get you to them, I have to take you back to where they came from and how they came to be. I am the great-great-granddaughter of slaves born into slavery. My great-great-grandmother was born into slavery. which means that she came here with, her parents came here, and then she was born in this country as a slave child. That was back in the early 1800s. Matter of fact, I have some little history here. My great-great-grandmother was born into slavery in 1815 in Georgia, a place near Hillsbury and not so far from Macon, Georgia. Her owners' names were the Whites, and she was known as Docia White. As she grew up, a young man came around and was interested in her, and his name was Jim Clark, and he asked to marry her. Back in those days, there was no formal marriages for the slaves. All they had to do was get permission from the master. He gave permission for Jim Clark to marry Docia White. And so from that union, the rest of us came to be. They lived in Georgia for a long time. During that time of the period of the slavery time, it was interesting as I grew up and found out more about the history. Let me backtrack 1 minute. This great-great-grandmother, I didn't get to know her because she passed in 1937, I believe it was. Her daughter, Ellen, who is my great-grandmother, I actually lived with her because at the age of 5, I went to live with an aunt. And the aunt's mother was born a slave. Grandma Ellen was born a slave. The life that they told me that they lived during that time was interesting because there was a situation, I don't know how to put it really, of color thing then. Now, my great-great-grandmother was direct descendant from Africa. She was very, 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 very dark. But my great-grandmother that I knew was a very fair-skinned lady because her dad, Jim Clark, was considered a mulatto, which means that he was biracial and had a very, very light color. So my great-grandmother Ellen was very light-skinned, and then that tendency, genetics came down through our family. One of the things that I want to be sure that you understand about the time that my great-grandmother Ellen, she's the one that I heard stories from. I was very, very small, but I still remember her and how she looked and how she talked, because she could get around and do things and get, in the house as well. And she talked about the cooking and the cleaning and the things that she did. Now, I want you to just stop and think a minute. Grandma Ellen was born into slavery, the daughter of Docia. Okay, she's just a little girl, she's just a little child growing up, but everybody that was considered a slave had a job. And as she grew up and was able to, I guess I'm going to consider probably her 5 or 6 years old, then she started having to be a companion to the master's younger children. Okay, so what she was doing every day was entertaining them, doing, as they fetch and tote, doing what they ask her to do. She's a child, but she's having to do what these children are asking her to do. But on the other side of that, there's a byproduct, because when they went to school, the kids had to go to school. Master's kids went to school. She had to go to school with them to carry their lunch boxes and their stuff to school. She had to sit in the classroom, but she couldn't participate. She wasn't to be taught. But God gave us something very special. It's up here. And when you get it up here, can't anybody take it away from you. I don't care what it is. And she sat in the classroom with those children, and she learned to read and write. She couldn't exercise that knowingly for the family and everything, but she learned to read and write. And when they came home from school, they play in school and they play in things, and she's participating. She was learning all of those things as she was growing up. Now her job, because she was fair-skinned, was to work in the house all the time. She helped raise the little kids, and then after she got older, then she was a house person. For a lot of the slaves during that time, what they worked in outside. If they were darker, they were worked outside. They were in the fields and whatnot like that. So those was just some of the things that I learned from them. But now getting to me, I was born, like I said, in 1932. We lived in Alma, and if you know going to Alma, when you get to the crossroads where either you go to north to Fayetteville or you keep going to Little Rock straight, we lived in that Y. That's what we called it, was the Y. You come out of Fort Smith on 64, and then you got to the Y. You either go straight on to Little Rock or you turned north and went to Fayetteville. We lived in that area right off the 71 highway. The family came from Georgia. Because of death in the family, they were handed down to a daughter who lived in Mississippi. They lived in Mississippi for a while, and then because the daughter that lived in Mississippi wanted education for her children, her girls, they moved to Memphis, Tennessee. But when the war came, they went back to Mississippi. And there were some incidents and things that went on during the war that prompted them to hide. And one of my grandmother Ellen's sons was captured or stolen or whatever, but they don't know what happened to him. He just, during that period of time, he just disappeared. So that was one loss that they had that they never got any closing on. But during that time of them coming into Arkansas, and that's the one part that's missing for me, that I don't know how we ended up. I know there after slavery ended, and they were set free. And I have a couple of quotes from my great grandmother Ellen that says they didn't know what it was like to be free, because I mean, they didn't know really what to do, because they had never been totally free to do and think on their own and do a lot of things. But somehow or another, they came from Mississippi to Arkansas and settled in the Alma area, in that area where I just described. There were two families of them. One settled on one side of the highway, and one was on the other side of the highway. The family that I was with was on one side, going north, would have been on the right side, and the other family was on the left. Now the family that was on the left was the brother to Ellen. And so we lived across the street across the highway. It wasn't a street, it was across the highway from each other. The house that we lived in was 3 rooms with a porch that went all the way across the front. You just have to think of those old houses out in the country that was just very small built but they had the long porch across the front, and it had a well on one end of it. I'm trying to give you a picture so you can see what we had to really live in. And as we grew up on that porch, we slept on the porch a lot of times, but as the family grew, you started out, the oldest child was born in 1920. My oldest sister was born in 1920, and I'm pleased to have her daughter here with me, supporting me this evening in this, and she's the first grandchild of Velma and Elwayne Sanders. But my oldest sister was born in 1920 and lived in that house where there were 3 rooms, a bedroom, a living room, and a kitchen. Okay, the family started growing and growing and growing. But we still had that 3 rooms. Eventually, at some point in time, that a 4th room was added on to the house. But I want you to just think about trying to grow up in an era where you had limited things. Now, I'm proud of my parents for their survival, my family. My dad was a railroad man back in the day. He was fortunate enough to get a job working on the Missouri Pacific Railroad. And so he worked some locally, but he was transferred to work out of Kansas. So he was just home on weekends. And as we grew, my mother was a saint because she raised us because he was gone. And we are all products of the village. We were raised by the village. The aunts, the uncles, grandparents, and all were supportive of the family that we lived as we grew up. Okay. We didn't have very much, and I didn't realize how poor we really were till I was grown. When I look back and see what we didn't have, but I don't ever remember being hungry, and we always had a place to live. And those were very important things to have. So we didn't get new items or this or that. We didn't get those kinds of things. It was rare. My mother, and you'll hear me talk a lot about her because she was a creative soul. Wanda can speak to that as well. She was a very creative person who could take nothing and make something out of it. She could take nothing and make something out of it. And she sewed. She made all of our clothes as we were growing up. We didn't know what new furniture was like. It was hand-me-downs, and somebody would give us a piece of this and give us a piece of that. But you didn't really know that when you came in our house. Because my mother would take and strip that furniture down, and I won't ever forget mahogany paint. It was a dark brown, almost black, if you know mahogany color, the real true mahogany color. And she would take that paint and paint everything the same color. All the different woods and everything was painted the same color. So when you looked at the furniture, you didn't know that it wasn't a match set. Because that's the way she did. She made the curtains, the mattresses for the bed. We didn't go out and buy a mattress. They bought that striped ticking. I see somebody that knows what I'm talking about. That striped ticking, and made the casing, and then we didn't have all this cushy stuff. At seasons, we went out and got grass. I want you to know, this is the truth. the casings were stuffed with grass that lasted for quite a period of time. Of course, it gradually would flatten out, and you would have, but by that time, it would be time to go out and refill them again or make new ones. But those are some of the kind of things that I grew up with. The property that we had a truck garden. Well, I mean, we had a garden, always had a garden. We had chickens. We didn't have a cow, but we had hogs. So we had those kinds of things. In our backyard was a orchard that had fruit trees in it. So we had plenty of fruit trees in the backyard. So we had fresh fruits and vegetables all the time. My mother canned, my mother cooked. And the other thing, in addition to take care of all of us, she did laundry to help to supplement our income. She did laundry for some of the people in the area there. And sometimes, and you're talking about, okay, I want to paint a picture. Back in those days, we didn't have no running water. You didn't have no electricity. You didn't have no gas. So how are you going to heat water to do laundry and wash? Anybody ever see one of those big old wash pots that you see now that people are using them for other things now? But we had a couple of those wash pots that was out in the backyard. And they went to the well, drew the water, put it in that pot and boiled it, let it get hot, and then wash. How many of you know anything about a number 3 tub? Okay, those were the tubs that we used that was set up outside. And I still have a rub board that was handed down, and I still have that rub board that you put in the tub and you put the clothes on there and you rub them back and forth to get them clean. So those were some of the things that you did. I don't want to spend a whole lot of time on that because there was a lot of more things, but that's just to give you a little background of how we came up. Okay, it was time to go to school. It was time to go to school. And the school that we went to was about, from where we lived, was about 6 miles that you walked every day. And this little aunt of mine that raised me was the school teacher, and she walked it every day, back and forth, back and forth. The school was designed for grades 1 through 12. It had 2 rooms. Grades 1 through 6 was in one room. Grades 7 through 12 was in the other room. 2 teachers was all that we had. Books. I cringe even thinking about those books now. Were hand-me-downs from the white school. We did not ever get the new books as they came in per season. We got the hand-me-downs, what was left over. That's the books that we studied. But you know what? As long as the information is there, the book can be tattered and torn, but if the information is in there, then you can still learn. And the teachers that we had were determined that our situation wasn't the best, but we were going to learn in spite of those things. So the school that was there for a long time was grades 1 through 12. I went there to that school. We all went to that school. But at some point, before I got to the high school, the area, the high school part of it was closed because of not enough students. And then those students that were high school, my older sisters and brothers, they went to Van Buren to a black high school over there. We couldn't go to the white high school there, so they went to the black high school in Van Buren. Well, over a period of time, that one closed, and that's why we ended up coming to Fort Smith to Lincoln High School. But all during that time of growing up, the people that we were surrounded by, our families, our churches, our church was one of the cornerstones of the community. Our churches are the cornerstones of the community. And you could count on support from the church of whatever was going on in that community. You could count on the support from the church. And as we grew, I was growing up, and I was fortunate enough to kind of take a little bit after my mother as far as liking crafts and sewing and things like that. So like my mother, I started sewing and making things and making my clothes. Now back to my mother when she was sewing. I don't know if any of you remember those old flour sacks. When flour used to come in those cloth sacks, they were printed, and my mother would take those sacks and save them up till she got enough to make a dress or a skirt or whatever it was. And so then as we came along, then I learned to sew, and my sister, one of my other sisters, learned to sew, and we started sewing. I don't know how early we were, because my feet couldn't touch the pedals and hers couldn't either. So we had a treadle machine, and so what we ended up doing was that whatever we were going to make, because back then we just made those gathered skirts and those little off-the-shoulder blouses. That was just a couple of pieces of material, and you could make those up real quick and easy. And so what we would do was, my sister Lucy, sometimes she would be doing the guiding through and doing at the top, and I'm down there doing that. And then we would change off sometimes, and then she would switch over, and then she did that, and I would sew and she would do it. So we both learned to sew that way. But all of the things back then were difficult. Going to school. When I got to be in the 8th grade here in Alma, and it was time for me to go to high school, I couldn't go to Alma High School. Van Buren didn't have a high school for me to go to. I had to come all the way to Fort Smith to high school. The bus. We had to be bused. We were bused before busing was popular. And the bus that was chosen for us was an old used hearse. You know, the other vehicle it wasn't the one they carried the bodies in, but the other vehicle that carried the flowers and the other equipment that they had. It had a window in the back and a window in the front. The first one that we had, it had a window in the back and a window in the front. So they cleaned it out and they put benches in there for us to ride to school, although they had all those other big buses with the school in Alma that could have very easily transported us to Fort Smith. We rode in that little bus and pulled up what you feel like when you pull up in front of, you're brand new in the first place, and you go into a brand new school, a whole new way of life, because you've been in this little one-room school and you're going into a whole new environment. And you pull up at the school in this, just think about how that made us feel, you know. And everybody was watching when we got off the bus and stuff. But we made it through the school, and I did graduate from Lincoln High School. Those days were rough. Living in Alma, growing up, was difficult because, like I said, that was then, this is now, but it was a traditional segregated town where there was very limited things, we still went to the back door. If you went to somebody's house, you went to the back door. You never went to the front door. And if you went to the front door, they told you to go to the back door, which happened to me. And going to the store to shop, you didn't get fair treatment all the time. If you were going shopping, you might be in there first, but if someone else came in, they just stopped waiting on you and waited on somebody else. If you went into some of the stores, they watched you from the time you walked in the door till you left. Nobody might not say anything, but you were watched from the moment that you went. But yet we were still spending our money in that store because there wasn't any place else to make those purchases that we needed. But I just want you to have a look at both sides of everything, because the things that matter most and what shapes people is what they live with and what they grow up with. And you wonder sometimes why people behave the way they do, or why they react the way they do. And you don't know their history. You don't know, and I'll get to that in a minute, but a part of a job that I was blessed enough to get put me into finding out that kind of situation. I got out of high school and wasn't able to go off to college because I didn't have the money, and I couldn't go to the college here because it was not open for black students. And it was a junior college, but still couldn't go to the college here. And so what I ended up doing, I just got myself married. And he was a young man in the community that had kind of an entrepreneurial spirit as growing up in the community. He never really wanted to work for anybody else because he never liked working for other people, because he didn't feel like he was getting fair treatment. And so he was in high school, and he set up a shoe shine business downtown in Fort Smith. And it grew, and it became just a way of a business for him, because he learned the ropes, and he was downtown where back then Garrison Avenue was bustling. And so he set up shop downtown at one of the locations, and was doing a good business because the banks was down there and all the businesses was down there. So anyway, we ended up getting married, and we had two children. But as part of the process of us growing up, I was working and I got a job. His mother was working at a store downtown, the old Arcade department store. And she got me a job down there as a maid, because that's the only thing that we could get jobs, and that's what she was doing. And so they hired me to work in the department on the second floor, which was called Better Women's Wear, which meant they were more expensive up there. And so I went to work. And I want you to know, in my 93 years, I've only had 3 jobs in my life. 3 jobs. And one of them was a restaurant in Alma that I didn't last very long. But I worked at that restaurant. And then I went to work for that Arcade department store, and I was there for 13 years as a maid. Because that was the only thing that we were hired to do. I'm saying that we were hired to do. And that didn't mean that wasn't all that we could do or did or were called on to do. But the positions that you could get was the maid. But one of the things that I guess I was one child that didn't always get along with my dad, but he did give me some good advice down through the years. And he said one of them was make the most of whatever situation in. Think about what's in it for me, not what's in it for them. What's in it for me? What am I going to get out of this? And so, and learn everything that you can learn. And I still use that, and I still push that now when I'm talking to people that are complaining about their work and issues on the job. But at that job that I had there at the store, like I said, I was there for 13 years, and I just like to do things, and I just don't let how you think always stop me from what I know and what I want to do. So as some of the duties and things were not for me to do, but I would just do them. Now, one of the things that I did was work the stock room where the new stock came in. They had a big stock room where all the stuff came in, and they would bring it to the floor. And part of my job was to help see that it got organized in place where the sales ladies could go back in there and find everything that they need. Well, I did that. But in doing so, I also kind of have an eye of my own of style and fashion. Because we had, and they had a department that back then they used mannequins on the floor for dressing and whatnot. And so they would have mannequins all over the floor. And he would come up periodically to change them out and put the new stuff come in. And I thought, sometimes he'd put something together and that ain't, I could do a little bit better than that, you know. But I would, when they would sell something off of the item, off of the mannequin, it would be standing there naked. And one of our sales ladies, she was so fussy about that. She just couldn't stand to have that. Now, we're talking about a mannequin. But she did not want a naked mannequin on the floor. So she would take they had an old house coat thing that she would throw over it. And so whenever I would see that, and if it'd be a long time before they would come up to, maybe the guys were busy or doing something else, that they couldn't come up and do the change, I'd just go back in the stock room and say, hey, let me see what I can put on her, and I'd go get an outfit, something, put on the mannequin, and I had privilege to go down to the shoe department and get shoes. The guy in the hat department, I knew him, you know, he worked with me, and I'd say, Doc, look back there, I'm putting something on there, I need a hat. And so he would help me get a hat. And I would just, when I finished it up, I had an outfit, purse, jewelry, everything was on that mannequin. And people would come in occasionally and they'd say, I want that. just like, you know, just like it is. They would end up with getting almost everything. But what I'm saying is, I didn't get paid to do that. I didn't even get recognized for doing that. But I did it because it was a learning for me. I could set up all of those things. And I like decorating, and I like making beautiful gift boxes, because my own gift boxes, I used to just knock myself out to make them beautiful. And so Christmas time came, and they were needing some gift boxes for display, and I just, they was right there, and I just went there and started making some boxes, and ended up when the people would come in and buy something, because the display boxes was there. Well, they would say, well, I want one that looks like that. Well, then they'd have to come get me because the ribbons or the bows or how they were made on there, they would come get me and ask me if I'd make the bows to finish out the box. But it was things like that, and there were so many things. And I couldn't work in the office, but I had just come out of school. in a class because I went back that I knew some bookkeeping and stuff, but I couldn't have that job. But when they needed help in filing and stuff, they could come and get me and put me in the back where nobody saw me to do the work, and I would get it done. But the thing about it, and I stayed there for 13 years, and I left there because there was an opportunity that came along where the federal government then was supportive of training, and there was a program called Manpower Development Training Act that was passed, and I went to school. It was a chance for me to go back to school. I went, and they did have they funded some classes at the college then, and I was able to attend those classes. And before I finished, well, just as we were getting ready to end the classes, they got a request that a new organization was going to be started here in Fort Smith, and he was looking for the man that was going to be running it was looking for some clerical help. And so they sent 3 of us from the class to be interviewed by him for this position. And I admit that the other, and I'm going to say this because it was the truth, the 2 other candidates that they sent were much better at the typing speeds and shorthand than I was. I could do it, but I was slower than they were. But I was the one that was hired, and I was hired simply because they needed a color in that office. They had 1 man, and they needed some more color, and I was chosen. But it was a blessing for me to get that position. And I don't know how many of you in here went through the Neighborhood Youth Corps programs back in the day. That's what they were called, the Neighborhood Youth Corps. And they were the first training programs specifically for young people for summer programs, and that's what it was. And so I went to work for that organization, and through transition over the years ended up 32 years, because it went from the Neighborhood Youth Corps, and then later years, and we just worked then, we worked 6 counties in Arkansas. And then it went from when started having the layoffs, Whirlpool, how many remember when Whirlpool closed down the first time? There was a huge layoff, and people that had been making it was the highest paying agency or business in town. So people there were making big money, you know. And so when they closed that down, there were a lot of people unemployed who didn't know how to do anything else. So they set up the program for us to work with those laid off workers. They were changing the name then to WAITA. We went to work under WAITA, and we were changing then. But what I'm getting at is that there was a transition down that we started working with adults, and different programs and things that were coming down where people were getting trained, and then we were working with the college, and people were being trained for these jobs, and and a lot of it was interesting too, because if you've been making at that time, I'll say $7 an hour, and you're going to come into my office and into our agency, and we're talking about $2 and a quarter minimum wage, that just sounds terrible. But I had to tell one person one time, I said, well, I'm not very good at math, but $2 sounds better than no dollars. And they had to stop and think about it, because at that time they had no income whatsoever. And it was difficult for them to do that, you know, to come in and work like that. But I worked with that agency, and this was the beginning of my transition, because I started in the agency as a, they called them stenographers back then, a secretary type. But as I advanced in the agency and was able to do more things and working with more people, then I moved up to a counselor. And we had one counselor who left, and he went out, had to leave, and so they asked me to take his place. And I knew all the work because I had to do all the counselors' reports and everything. That was part of what I was doing, so I knew their jobs better than some of them knew them themselves. But I went out to several of the areas in South Sebastian County. That was going to be my area, was Sebastian County, and I had the South area, which was from Lavaca, Greenwood, Hartford, all down through there. That was my area as well. And they weren't used to working with people of color at all in some of those areas, because those towns didn't have any people there that lived there. And so it was difficult for some of them to adjust to the fact that I had the authority to say who they could have to work and who they couldn't, because what we were doing, we were placing participants in those places for work training. They were supposed to go in there to work. They might work in the office, they might work in the maintenance, just wherever they needed assistance. Then we would supply somebody from our office, one of the trainees, to go in there and work and train. They were supposed to be training these people for future employment, other places. And it was very difficult for them to adjust to working with me, because they had never done that before. And there's the stereotypical thing was, this is not what I want to do. This is not where I want to go with it. But they ended up over the years. It took several years for them to really accept the fact that I knew what I was doing, and I had the backing of my office administrator. And when she sent me out to do or to work with somebody or to make assignments and stuff, I knew whatever decision that I made, because I could communicate with her, and I knew whatever decision that I could make that she would stand behind me. And one instance was, I'll just say this, was, I won't give you the town or anything, but it was one instance where I was assigning students to work, and there were several on the list to work, but we look at the most in need first to be assigned to the jobs. And so I had selected this young man to work at this position. And when I went to the school and gave them the name of the person, that this young man that was going to be working there, oh, they just said, oh, no way. They didn't want nobody from that family. Now, we're not talking about black children, we're talking about a white child. They didn't want anybody because they had had trouble with that family, and they didn't want to deal with that particular child. Now, this kid ain't done nothing. He's just been to school. But they didn't want to even deal with their family. And I said, well, I'm sorry. If you don't take him, well, you don't have anybody. Well, before I got back to the office, he'd already called and talked to my administrator. And so when I I got there, she had sent word for me, says when she comes in, have her come straight to my office, and which I did. And anyway, we talked about it, and I told her the situation. And she says, well, I told him that whatever, I would talk to you, but whatever your decision was would stand. And so she called him back and told him that my decision stand, that he would either take this young man or he would not have anybody. So he reluctantly took the young man. But now before this young man went back out to work, I went back down there and had a counseling session with him and let him know that I wanted him to do a good job and what he was supposed to do, to follow the rules and the regulations and everything. I didn't want him to make any mistakes and step out of line, because that would have been all they needed to terminate him. And so, I guess after about 2 or 3 months on the job, I was down there and talked to the supervisor, and he was complimenting me on what a good job the young man was doing. And so it's just, it's just how you work with people and how they see things. And there was so many instances that I came into in working in that area, because they weren't used to working with people of color. And I learned a lot from that. Well, that was with the NYC program. As we graduated on into working with the adults and whatnot like that, we had opportunities to go outside of Fort Smith for training. And that was the big key for me, was when we were, the programs were under the Department of Labor that you hear in the news, about the news and everything. Okay, they would have training sessions in Dallas and Washington and different places. And so we were fortunate enough to go to those trainings. Well, I'm getting additional training on top of what we had here. So the education and everything that I got was just multiplied. And so one of the things that I did, one of the sessions that I went to was a big help to me, because you won't believe it, but there was a time that there was no way that I could sit here and talk to you like this, because I was shy, believe it or not, and very uncomfortable, like I said, talking and meeting people. And even some of the training sessions that I would go to, I would go there and I didn't know anybody, and I wasn't one of those that just run up to everybody and I wasn't outgoing enough to do that. But this session that I went to at one of the places said, this training workshop that we went into, one of the other staff members and I went into this workshop because she worked with participants as well. And the trainer was just absolutely outstanding. What he was saying was everything that we had been wanting to do and wanting to learn and whatnot. And so when we got through with that class, she and I both were so excited that we've got to have him come to Fort Smith, because we had an office here in Fort Smith at that time. Said, we've got to bring him and let him do a workshop for us here, because he's telling us things of how to work with people that we need to know, because we have people who are talented, who are educated and everything, but still can't keep a job. And there are reasons why you can't keep a job. So anyway, we had him to come to Fort Smith and set up a training workshop where we brought in participants and staff. So we all had to be trained in that. And the things that we learned from that, I am still using them now. And that was a stepping stone for me, because one of the programs that came out of that session that we used at work with adults was, we called it PREP. And that's getting you ready for jobs. And the way the program is designed, the way the program is set up and designed, it breaks down barriers. And we would have, okay, if we had a group of people who were approved for the program, then we brought them in and they had to have 3 days of this, the classes were 3 days. And they had to come in and spend time in that class. And we went over this material and stuff with them. And I meet people now that I don't hardly even recognize that say, Miss Johnson, you remember when I was in WAITA, that's what they always called it, and I went through that class of yours. I wouldn't be where I am now if it hadn't been for us going through that class, for me going through that class. Because what it did was each of us in here carrying something. And we sometimes find ourselves being dysfunctional, or that we don't do things that we are capable of doing, is simply because there's something stopping us and we don't know what it is. And this class helps to uncover that things. And in many of the instances in the classes, there were things that were said that happened to them as little children. Little children. The one incident, the one that sticks with me most, that this young man, was in the class, and his history was he had just had job after job. He was just this and that. He just had a struggle. But what he said was that his mother was angry with him when he was a little boy, and told him she wished he had never been born. Now, can you imagine the shock that would do to somebody? Well, she said it in a fit of anger. She moved on. He didn't. That stuck with him the rest of his life. And so we had to do a lot of things with him and work with him to help him to move past that. And to let him know who he was. And that's the same thing, and that's one of the, and this same program, after I retired, I'm getting to me now. When I retired, I have took and got an okay from work to do a version of that. And I did it for our church, when we, at our youth, at the church. I set it up and we did it for the church youth. I did it for the Delta sorority debutantes when they were getting them ready. That I worked with them with that. And I did it for the drug court, Sebastian County Drug Court group. I went and I did it for them a few times. But it's a way, and so that was really helping me. That was my kind of a stepping stone for me going through the working to help me get started into getting out into doing things. Now, for me, one of the other early things that got me started into doing community work and whatnot was the YWCA, Young Women's Christian Association. It was here in Fort Smith. We don't even have one here anymore. But it was here in Fort Smith, and it worked with young people and adults as well. And I knew the lady that was the director of that, and I worked with that, and that was one of the first boards that I ever sat on, was the YWCA board. So that was kind of an introduction into me getting into community and into community work. From there, there's just so many things, and I know I'm rambling here, but I apologize for that. But my mind is just overflowing with all the different things. One of the work trips that I was on, when I was working, was we had a trip to Washington, D.C., and it was shortly after, about the same time as the legislation had been passed for the Martin Luther King holiday observance, when it had been approved. In one of the exhibit halls, they had, just a big display, of all of this material about including the document itself and about observances and how, just information about the Martin Luther King observance and the passage of that legislation. So I just gathered up a bunch of that and I brought it back to Fort Smith. And at that time, everybody was thinking about getting ready for the next year to celebrate the Martin Luther King holiday. I met with the Northwest Region Federated Women's Clubs, which is now a part of the National Association for Colored Women's Clubs. That's where we were then, but I met with them and we formed a committee at the time. And what she and I and the group got together, this was the Federated Women, we contacted all of the civic and social and churches in this area. We went up as far as Fayetteville, we went down as far as Ozark, we went over into Oklahoma and pulled a coalition together and had the first Martin Luther King observance in Fort Smith that we had. That was the first one in 1986, and we're still having them every year since then. I was the chair of that for almost 10 years. And during that period of time, we worked with this area. And as part of what we ended up doing was we included, like I said, we had a week-long celebration, or I won't call it a celebration, observance, that included the churches and the civic and social groups of the thing. And we had our first banquet, and sometimes in your communities and whatnot, the same people are recognized over and over again. They're doing good work, but there are other people who do things and they're doing it in a more quiet way, and they're not always recognized. And so our purpose that year when we had that banquet was to recognize those that, we call it an achievement, but it was those persons, the unsung heroes, more or less, the unsung heroes of our community. And that's where the people that we selected to receive, and we got mixed comments about it because there were people who were named that other folks didn't know anything about, of what they were doing, and we explained what they were doing. But we had one lady at that time, she was one of the first ones to get it, and found out for years she had been doing it, but she had been helping students go to college out of her pocket. Every year she was sponsoring some children to help them to go to college. And she wasn't doing it for recognition, she was doing it because that was what was put on her heart to do. And there were so many other people that was in similar situations that we found out they were doing good things in our community without being acknowledged for it. They didn't do it to be acknowledged. And so that was one of the first things that we did with that. And then we went on from there. Like I said, I was chair for almost, I would say 8 years, but during that time, we also set up, we had the youth involvement in it. The youth had their own programs. They had oratorical contests where we developed their speaking talents, and they were awarded for that. And then we went from there, and in addition to with the youth scholarships, that we gave scholarships. And our first scholarship that we gave was $250. That doesn't sound like very much. But when you didn't have any money at all to start with, and we didn't have anything set up, but that was just from a few donations that we could get at that time. It was $250 was the first scholarship that we were able to give, and I think we gave 3 or 4 of those at that time. But then I think the last one, by the time I ended up, they were up to about $1,000, and they're up now $1,500 or more. And then we were able to go and get businesses to help us. Pepsi-Cola was one of our sponsors, and Esquire Jewelry was one of our sponsors of scholarships, and we had several others that came in and helped us with the MLK program. So the MLK was one of my prime things of getting going in this area, and thank God it's still going. Now, in addition to working in with the MLK program, another group that I'm involved with that does great work is Phyllis Wheatley Club, is what we know it as here in Fort Smith. The Phyllis Wheatley Club is the oldest, one of the oldest clubs in the country as a member of the National Association of Colored Women's Clubs Incorporated. The National Association was organized in 1896. Phyllis Wheatley Club was founded in 1898. It has been a continuous organization for 127 years. And that's something to talk about. A bunch of women that can keep something going that long. That in itself is something. But the purpose of that organization, of our organization, is to raise the standards of the homes and the community. It was started back in the day when, right at the end of slavery, there were no opportunities for women of color. The most of them had been in the domestic scene and housing and stuff like that. So they really didn't know, and education was very limited for those, especially in the South. Those in the North had a little bit better opportunities for education. But these women got together. They had started a little club here and a little club there, just women getting together and doing things. Now the group here in Fort Smith started in 1898 as a result of a tornado that destroyed Fort Smith. Back in the early books, they called it a cyclone. It was a tornado that destroyed Fort Smith. And it just devastated areas all over town. Okay, there was no help for the black community to rebuild or to get assistance and stuff. There was no resources available to them. So this lady, her name was Miss Mame Josenberger, had come to Fort Smith as a teacher at Howard High School, and that's something else you might want to check on. Howard Elementary was formerly a Howard High School here in Fort Smith. And so she came here to teach at that school and recognized that something's got to be done. So she and several other women that was kind of in leadership positions in the school systems and all got together, and they said, we've got to do something to help ourselves. Nobody else is going to help us. So what they ended up doing was they gathered up, found the families, found out whatever they could do for them. They formed sewing circles, made clothes and quilts. They found old furniture and stuff and helped them to get these people back on their feet again. And that was the beginning. That was in 1898. A couple of years, and after they did that, they decided, hey, you know, there's a need for what we're doing. And so they stayed together. And in around 1901, Ms. Josenberger had been a student at Fisk University in Tennessee. And one of her classmates was the wife of Booker T. Washington. Her name was Margaret Washington. And so she was there. She was, W.E.B. Du Bois was also a classmate of hers. She completed that, and then Miss Washington went on and was working out of Washington, D.C. and in that area. And she came back through Arkansas to visit Miss Josenberger. And they talked about what they were doing. And when she found out all the good work that this little group here in Fort Smith had been doing, they were invited to come to Washington, D.C. to the national meeting. So when they went to Washington, D.C. to the national meeting, they came away, yes, we want to belong to this national because they're doing the same thing we're doing. We're all on the same page. So in 1901, Phyllis Wheatley Club became a part of that national association, and we've been a part of that national association ever since then, and we still are as of today. The work that we do here in Fort Smith, we've had scholarships, we've done a lot of things, and back when we just celebrated the anniversary of Katrina, from the New Orleans Hurricane Katrina. One of the things that Fort Smith did at that time, because we had so many people to come into Fort Smith, one of the things that Phyllis Wheatley did was to go about helping a lot of those families to get situated and finding homes and furnishings and stuff for them. And Ms. Childs was part of that, and she helped a lot in helping us do that. The work that we did in Phyllis Wheatley Club here helped Arkansas to get the national recognition from the National Association group, and we got an award for Arkansas, but it was based on primarily because the work that we did in this area that helped us to get that award for the work that we did at that time with Hurricane Katrina. And I was a part of that as well. My work with the National Association of Colored Women's Clubs kind of got thrown into it kind of by accident. Just, it's one of those things when I'm not always waiting for somebody to ask me to do something, but if I see something that needs to be done, I kind of, can I help you with this or that? So that's how I kind of ended up with that as with our local group here. My job that I had for those 30 some odd years, I didn't really get to attend the meetings because our meetings were usually in July, and that was my busiest time. So I didn't really get to start attending meetings until after I retired. But at the time that I did, when I did retire, then I got really involved in the meetings and ended up with getting in a position because I'd helped with a convention here. Then the ladies from the state saw the work that I was doing here, and then they asked me if I would participate in the state office. Am I done?
Not for me, but for the library. They're gonna.
I apologize.
No, you don't apologize. We could all sit here forever, but they're gonna
No,
close the library.
let me say this. I want to thank everyone for coming and listening to this. Like I said, I didn't have it in any kind of order, so I hope that you go. And I got one little thing here I want to say here too. My little quotes that keeps me going. One of them is if you just listen. If we all join hands, we can reach twice as far. Okay, you're sitting there, you can only reach right here. But if each one of you would put your hands together and all across, look how much further we can reach. See, look how much further we can reach. So that if you don't take anything else away from what I said. And the other one is, we just live here, but you got to do something. Service. What is service? Service is the rent we pay for the space we occupy here on earth. I'm going to say it again. Service is the rent we pay for the space we occupy here on earth. So if you're not doing anything, you're just wasting space.
This video is a production of the Sound Collection Lab, located in the History, Social Sciences, Philosophy Department originating from the University of Arkansas at Fort Smith.